welcome on to stage stand-up comedian and author, Papa CJ.
Thank you so much for the fabulous lighting at this venue, which allows everyone to see the person. Oh, well done. Hello, hello, hello. It's wonderful to be here. Give me a cheer if you're happy to be here. I have to say, that is the most hyped up introduction I have ever heard in my whole life. But it is still wonderful to be here. It's wonderful. I grew up in Calcutta, so it's nice to be introduced onto stage by somebody from Calcutta, right? Because 2 weeks ago, I was in Singapore, and the show I did was hosted by a Pakistani stand-up comedian. So this guy got on stage, warmed up the audience. He invited me onto stage. In that second, I realized I had been a part of history. It was the first time I had seen a Pakistani invite an Indian to occupy a piece of land that he was occupying before. Listen, 3 people clapping is not enough. If you're going to clap, clap all together. Well done. Now, I don't know if you've been to Singapore, but nothing ever happens in Singapore. The last time I went there, front page of the newspaper, there was a pig on the street. Boss, if there is a pig on the street, in Singapore, it becomes headline news. In Germany, it becomes a sausage. In America, it becomes the President of the United States of America. Huh? And then I'll be honest, that Singapore show, we had a very drunken night, finished at 5:30 in the morning. Next morning, I'm catching a flight to Kuala Lumpur. I get to the airport. In my hangover, I lost my boarding pass. I went to the woman at the counter and said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I've lost my boarding pass. Can you give me a fresh one? This woman started shouting at me. How can you be so careless? How can you lose your boarding pass? I said, excuse me. You work for Malaysian Airlines. You lost an entire bloody plane, all right? I see some of you not clapping at that joke. You're like, boss CJ, that has gone too far. We cannot clap about these things. I went to America. I got to immigration under the Trump administration. This officer looks at my passport, looks at my beard. I had a beard at this point. He says, you know what? You Indians, you're a mistake. In fact, India is a mistake. I said, come on, officer. As an American, you should be grateful to us. He said, why? I said, well, because when Christopher Columbus discovered America, he was looking for India. So, to be perfectly honest, you are the bloody mistake. You know, I love doing this joke in Calcutta because you guys appreciate it, you understand it. I cracked this joke in Gurgaon. I'd gone to America. I was doing this TV show called Last Comic Standing. Has anyone heard of it? Massive reality show, 3,000 contestants. And what I found really amusing was how excited all the American comedians were. Oh my God, 10 million people watch this program. I'm like, boss, I come from India. If I open my bathroom window, 10 million people will show up live. All right, guys, we've got you laughing at the start, but it's time to start the session. I'm absolutely thrilled to be doing a session with this man. You all know him. He is the youngest editor in the history of Indian journalism. He was the editor of the Bombay magazine at 22. He has a career that spans TV, print, new media. He has a list of awards that is longer than any list I can count. You know the gentleman I'm talking about, an absolutely wonderful man and a good friend. Please put your hands together and welcome onto stage the fantastic Mr. Veer Sanghvi.
Hello, Calcutta. Hello, CJ. Great to be here. Okay, so we're going to unveil your book or what?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Anyone seen this guy's show? He has a show called Naked, which when you look at him doesn't sound very appetizing, but he actually comes on with all his clothes on, and it's the funniest and most moving show I've ever seen, at the end of which, but don't let this put you off, he gets naked. Yeah? Correct?
But don't worry, there's no naked
on stage, yeah?
There's no naked pictures in the book, all right? So you'll be safe with that one.
You could have sold more copies then.
Come, should we open that and then start chatting?
Come.
sounds too grand. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
very
real
nervous
big
about it.
fanfare, yeah.
I have no clue how to be an author. I know how to be a comedian, but being an author is still very new to me.
Anybody wants to know what the book is about? I'm just reading the thing at the back, which you can't see. The big blurb is, I come from the land of the Kama Sutra. I can F ... you in more ways than you can count. That's what the book's about.
Come on, Veer, let's have a seat. So, Veer, let me ask you the first question.
I'm going to talk to you about your book, or you're going to talk to me on mine?
No, we'll just keep chatting.
Okay,
Is it
all
okay?
right, okay.
We'll throw it up to questions
Okay,
later.
Yeah.
But any controversial stuff you want to ask,
So,
Veer, just
yeah.
go for it. Huh?
Yeah. And you don't have to read his book, yeah? It's okay. Right.
So, Veer, first question, by the way.
Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
that this is the first time you are doing a Times of India Lit Fest.
Yeah, it's true. It's actually a great pleasure, one, because of Vinita, who's invited me, and that's really wonderful. Also, I think it's probably the first time in history the words Times of India and literary have been used in the same sentence. So it's really special. So it's really special.
So does it feel a little bit like sort of sleeping with the enemy kind of thing?
No, it's not nothing. Why is everything about sex with you guys? Yeah? We're all friends. I mean, I've written for the Times of India so often.
Yeah.
And the newspaper community in India is actually closer and smaller than you will realize, because newspapers are an endangered species. Less and less people read newspapers. Many of them are closing. So it's important for those of us who are still around to be as close as possible.
Fair play.
Yeah.
So, Veer, now I know this session is sort of supposed to straddle both our books, which is why it's called Game Changers.
Straddle, we're back to business. All right, go on. Yeah.
Notice he's the one doing all the dirty talk, by the way, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm just pointing it out. Okay.
So here's the question.
Yeah.
Firstly, it's pretty clear that if somebody else was writing this book, Veer would be featured as a game changer himself. I'm just saying, if I was writing the book, that would definitely be the case.
Flattery will get you everywhere. Keep going.
Excellent, everywhere. So here's the question.
Yeah.
A lot of my book talks about vulnerability,
Yeah.
and your book talks about game changers.
Yeah.
Now, of the 10 game changers you spoke to, who was, you're going to catch me on this one as well, who was the most comfortable being naked in front of you? And I say naked, I don't mean physically naked. I mean in terms of vulnerability.
This is like a literary festival, yeah, not a porn festival. Okay, go on.
So who was most comfortable being vulnerable in front of you?
Of Vijay Shekhar Sharma of Paytm, who cried, I think, 4 times during the interview. He was easily the most vulnerable and the least able to control his feelings. And with one of the interviews for the book we did on television, and we had to actually stop the cameras because, you know, sometimes you do a show and somebody is moved and you see tears going gently down their cheeks, and it's sort of dignified but moving moment. Vijay cried loudly with sobs, so we had to stop the cameras. He's a very emotional man.
And I noticed that 2 of the people, or more than 2 actually,
Yeah.
have origins from Calcutta.
Is that all?
I think there's more than 2. There's
Trying to remember.
there's
But there's
Gagan.
Gagan Anand, who's from
Yeah.
New Alipur.
Yeah.
And there's Asma Khan,
Asma.
who's from, who actually worked with me in ABP.
So are there any traits that you find are common from the people of Calcutta?
Yeah, actually, it's, first of all, I mean, one of the funny things about people from Calcutta is that in the world of food and wine, there are 3 big names. One is, of course, Gagan Anand, who everyone has heard of. The other is Asma Khan, who was named this year by Business Insider as the coolest woman in food on the planet, who's been on Netflix Chef's Table, who's very cool. There's a guy called Rajat Par, who many of you may not have heard of, who grew up in Calcutta in the lane behind Hindustan International Hotel, whose real name is Rajat Parashar. He's gone off to America, and he's probably one of the world's most respected sommeliers. All 3 are from Calcutta. All 3 are not bongs. So I don't know, make what you will out of that.
So given food is such a big part of Calcutta, what's the first place you go to eat when you come to Calcutta, if there is one?
There isn't one. I mean, all the when I lived here, some of you may not know this, I lived here for 8 years, but many of those restaurants, starting from Sky Room, are dead. They don't exist any longer. So I love the food of Calcutta, but most times, give me a choice, and I'll go for the chaat. Calcutta has the world's best puchkas. You can go for the chana, you can go for the tikki. which is what I do near AC Market, near Vardhan Market, those guys. The best food in Calcutta is in people's homes. It's on the streets. Sometimes you get a good meal in restaurants, but not always.
Fair play. I lived in Calcutta for 19 years.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a whole chapter in my book about growing up in this city. And for me, when I land at the airport, the first thing I will do is literally go all the way to New Market, go to the back and still have Nizam rolls. I know people will say, no, Kusums, you should go to Kusums on Park Street, but I'm sorry, I've been having Nizam rolls since 1980, and there is no comparison.
Nizams or nothing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So do you want to talk about your book, or are you just going to push mine?
No, we'll talk about what I'll do is I'll
Have
make
you
this
seen
book
this book, by the way?
stand up and all.
Yeah. You know what the book is about. He's probably going to tell you anyway, but I'll tell you. It's an autobiographical thing. It's about growing up in Calcutta in the 80s, mainly?
Yeah.
Yes? It's about growing up in an era of scarcity, an era before there was liberalization, when none of us had much money, our parents didn't have much money. Every time you had a tube of toothpaste, you squeezed it till the end because you couldn't afford to waste any toothpaste. It's about that era, it's about that Calcutta, it's about growing up. And then it goes into his own life, it goes into his marriage, the failure of his marriage, his relationship with his son. And it goes from being really amusing and funny, it's laugh out loud funny, to being, I defy you to actually read this book or see the show this is based on without tears in your eyes. It's really a brilliant book.
Actually, it was middle class people here who consider themselves middle class. Can you give me a cheer? So
That's
you will all.
What are the others? You're all rich guys. They're more middle class than that, yeah. Come on, once more. A cheer from every middle class person in the audience. Yes! Now we're talking.
So
That's
you
how to work an audience, yeah.
I'm still learning. This whole author thing is still pretty new to me.
Yeah, kya kare, yeah. You
No,
should
because for a lot
you
of
should
us-
try stand-up comedy.
Listen, Shashi Tharoor is doing stand-up comedy now.
That's true, yeah.
So he's one of the guys in your book. Have you seen his stand-up at all?
I'm sure it'd be very good because he has great comic timing. He knows how to crack a joke. He knows when to pause. He knows the lifelines, the laugh lines. I assume somebody else is writing the material because he's not a natural stand-up.
Well, he's ironically there's a photograph of him in my book doing stand-up for the first time on a stand-up stage, which is about 8 years ago.
You wrote the material?
No, but in this case, he was telling a joke that I knew he told really well. He was in the audience and we called him up.
Yeah.
And his comic timing is phenomenal.
He's a natural comedian. He's such a brilliant talker that whether it's serious or whether it's funny, he just makes it work.
I can't even keep two books standing up here.
Okay. That's my book that he's dropped here.
Thanks. Mine wasn't even standing up here.
Yeah.
Okay, so go on.
Never mind.
I'm talking about the books. Filthy guy, yeah. What a guy. Like, this is a side of Veer you don't see in all those, intellectual food discussions and all.
Yeah.
There are children here, yeah.
There are children here? Okay. Parents, never bring your children to see Papa CJ.
Listen, Veer Sanghvi is the one doing all the naughty stuff, all right? So Veer, tell me this. Now, Arnab Goswami is one of the guys featured in your book.
Yes, he is.
I've met him off screen.
Yeah.
He's quite a different man on screen to who he is off screen.
Yeah, I think that's fair of many people. You know, I knew Arnab in Calcutta when I worked over here. He used to work for the Telegraph and I used to work for the now defunct Sunday magazine. So we were in the same office. And he was this very intellectual kind of guy. Most people don't know this, he's been to Oxford and to Cambridge. He's been to St. Anthony's
But
College.
like studying or visiting? Just like.
Let me say, yeah. He didn't go on a day tour on a bus tour. But he was at St. Anthony's, which is one of the most prestigious colleges in Oxford, only fellows. He's written a book. He's done a lot of research. So don't be fooled by that on-screen shouting persona. He's actually an intellectual and deep guy.
Because, when I heard him speak, I was superbly impressed. He was so articulate.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who knows his stuff. So clearly there's an element of it which is, what you do for the ratings and what you do to get the attention.
But it's true of most people, no? If you see Amitabh Bachchan on screen and he's dancing and he's fighting and all that, and he's one sort of guy, and you meet him and you sit next to him, if he says 5 words in an hour, you're lucky. He's just a very shy man in real life. So on screen and off screen is very different.
So I've got a story. I used to, I went to Oxford as well. They made a mistake. So
You
I was
went to Oxford?
I did. I did my
Okay.
master's in business at Oxford.
Oh, Oxford Business School.
Thanks a lot. It's still the University of Oxford, okay?
Yeah, okay.
So I was living in
The Calcutta audience, you're not impressed by business school.
I know. So I was living in Calcutta at this point.
Yeah.
And in those days, Jet Airways used to have these Apex fares. So
Yes.
if you bought in advance, you could buy a ticket at 25% of the fare, economy. So I flew back from London to Delhi, and then I was catching this flight on an Apex fare to Calcutta. So I decided that I would board last minute and go and sit down in business class and see what happens. Right? So everyone got on the plane, I got on the end, I sat down in business class. Suddenly 4 or 5 people more got on the aircraft, of which 2 or 3 were in business class. So I sort of stood up and started looking at the luggage target. Then I sat down, and this woman came and stood next to me. So I wasn't sure whether I was in her seat or not, so I got up, and she sat down. Anyway, flight started, I started chatting with her. Now, the cabin crew who comes says, hello, Mr. So-and-so, hello, Mrs. So-and-so. Obviously, I wasn't there, so they looked at me and said, hello, sir. Right? Would you like something to eat? So I didn't even eat. I said, listen, if they catch me, I'll say, yaar, khana bhi nahi khaya maine.